Noah does specialize in running backs, and I've been following him for a long time. Doing great work over at BDGE. I patronize his website, nomoreparties.com, and he does really, really excellent work and has found me quite a lot of value at the running back position. And just like every year, running back tends to kind of get short shrift when we're talking about the class coming out and with the rookies. And I think that this year is kind of special, and there are some things that I've read on Noah's website where he's talking about there might not be a Bijan Robinson or a Breece Hall, but that doesn't mean that there's not value and there's not quality in this running back class. So he's here to talk about that. We will get into all of that stuff. Go ahead and let everybody know where, for the time being, they can find your content and everything. And introduce yourself, and our graphics department will put up some nice little cards and transitions and stuff like that for us. So tell everybody about Noah Hills. Where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking about some football and talking about myself, of course, my favorite topic. But I'm Noah. You can find my work at nomoreparties.com. You can follow me on Twitter at nomoreparties. Geographically, I'm located in the Boise area.
Okay.
But yeah, what else would you like to know?
Well, we'll get into that.
I have not been making videos since like the beginning of the season, I believe, is when I stopped. But yeah, just kind of, I mean, no beef with them or with Nick. We're still cool. But I just took a step back as I was studying for the LSAT and filling out law school applications and stuff, and then just didn't find the time to get back into it. So not currently doing that. So just writing articles pretty much these days.
Spoiler alert. So LSAT and law school applications, any updates on that in that front? And maybe that leads to why you're going to stop content creation.
Yeah. I'll be heading to law school in the fall. Don't know exactly where yet, but probably Washington University in St. Louis. But regardless, I'm continuing to research running backs and produce content through the NFL draft and the end of this month, April. After which I'll focus on finding apartments and moving across the country and taking care of all that stuff. So I'll be writing just for another month. But if you sign up now, you'll get access to like the archive of articles through the rest of the summer. You'll get access to like the final version of the rookie rankings after the draft through the summer, to use for rookie drafts and stuff. So I mean, it's not super expensive. It's like $8 for both the rankings and the articles. So if you're interested, I think there's still some value to be had in kind of like a one-time monthly membership.
You're kind of West Coasty. You're Boise, yeah. So you're not too far from this Northern California Bay Area. Okay. I say it loud. I'm NorCal and I'm proud. Are you from Boise? Did you move there? Like, what is that your place?
Yeah. I grew up not in Boise, but around Boise, in Nampa, actually, for anyone there who happens to be listening from Nampa. But been in the Boise area for pretty much my entire life. I spent a semester out of state for my undergrad, but I was not ready to be out of state on my own and was very homesick. So I moved back home. And then I lived for Alaska for 6 months working construction a couple of years ago.
Where in Alaska?
We kind of moved around a little bit as we kind of like bounced around to jobs, but I was, the place where I was staying was Cordova, which was beautiful. Didn't have a ton of fun, but it was right. A beautiful place and a good experience. But other than that, yeah, I've been in Idaho my whole life.
You're in Idaho, and there's like really the closest sports teams are like the Mariners and Seahawks, and then the 49ers. So like, what was your kind of like sports interest level growing up?
Yeah, I was pretty into sports, especially football and the NFL when I was a kid. Like especially so. Um, and my favorite team was the Packers. It still is the Packers. I picked them, I think, halfway out of like contrarianism because most like my dad, my brother, like most people around us were Seahawks fans, and the Seahawks were decent at the time. At least this is like 2002 to 2003, so they, it was like the beginning of the, the Matt Hasselbeck, Sean Alexander era. They were decent, and especially increasingly so into the mid 2000s. But yeah, I liked Brett Favre. We had a backyard football game that he was in, and one of my earliest football watching memories is Al Harris's pick six against Matt Hasselbeck in the on the first play of overtime, I believe in the wild card playoffs,
Yeah.
which is an iconic Packers versus Seahawks moment. So I think that kind of really solidified it for me.
Yeah, there was another iconic Packers Seahawks moment. I think this was in 2013, 2011 or 2012, 2013. Monday Night Football game, a big heave ho into the end zone, last play of the game. And I want to say it was a Seahawks, it was a Green Bay interception.
It should have
That
been.
sound familiar?
It should have been, but it was called a Seahawks touchdown, and that was a
Right. Okay.
yeah, that's not the most painful memory because everybody knows it's bullshit. But there are quite a few in that era of Seahawks Packers matchups that the Seahawks got the better of Green Bay. So not a generally happy time.
Well, that game that week I had the Packers defense in my starting lineup and I lost by 0.75.
Oh
It
damn!
was my first under 1 point loss in fantasy,
Yeah,
and it was awful. I was in Eagle River at a pizza place, and what we were kind of I was watching it out of the corner of my eye and just freaking out because it was awful. Growing up in Idaho, there you don't have those links, so you're kind of a free agent. So you're more subject to like you like the look of Brett Favre or the color scheme or something like that. And when you're under 10 years old and something like that kind of clicks, that's it. Like,
yeah.
how about Boise State? You follow Boise State?
I did when I was a kid. I was pretty into it through the Ryan Dinwiddie years before Jared Zabransky. I remember going to games pretty regularly. The Jared Zabransky era when they won the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma, I was at that game.
Nice.
And then kind of the Kellen Moore years were fun as well. After that, like I don't really, or at least before I kind of really started watching running backs, I don't really follow college football as a fan that much. And once Boise State wasn't really that good anymore, and like I don't really care about the team, but I definitely was into it when I was a kid.
They had kind of a resurgence last season, and Taylon Green, the new Arkansas quarterback, came up at Boise State, and I hear that there's a nice little running back out of Boise State.
There is, yeah. Ashton Genty is their running back right now, and
Mm-hmm.
he might be the RB1 next year. He's a beast.
Wow. Okay. So we'll get all that into all that in the DEVEY portion. Okay. So you're growing up in the Boise area. You're a Packers fan, and now there's a through line with people who do kind of content creation, and especially somebody who is as analytics and I mean because your stuff you vid grind and you do kind of analytics and charting and stuff like that. So you're getting the stuff on paper and you're getting the visual stuff. Not a lot of people do that. They either kind of grind video or they like look at stats and things like that. But your packages are pretty comprehensive. When did you start kind of like recognizing that there's something beyond the box score to kind of dive into, like, what was the genesis, the motivation for you to like figure out, how do I determine who's the best player, regardless of position, when consensus is this?
I think when I first started writing about running backs, I was motivated or inspired, whatever, by like a gap in the existing analysis that I perceived. I felt like people who only watched film were missing something. Like they were missing the forest for the trees somehow, in a way that I couldn't really define. But whatever it is about just watching film, I think you're a little bit too in the weeds to get the full picture of like why a guy might look good to you but not actually be legitimate in some way. And I felt like people who were only using numbers, especially with running backs, and especially at the time, this is like 2018, probably, like peak player profiler era. Yeah, and I really came up on like Matt Kelly and Nate Liss. But one thing that I thought was lacking, and one thing that I was lacking, or that I perceived was lacking, particularly in running back analysis, was everything seemed to be about everything but how good players were at running the ball. Like, speed score, it has signal because it's important to be big and fast. Target share has signal because it's important to be involved in the passing game. Breakout age and dominator rating, things like that, have signal because it's important to be on the field a lot, get the ball a lot as early as possible. And like there's all these kinds of metrics, the kind of really pillar metrics for running back analysis that we've used now for almost a decade, that really didn't say anything about how good anybody was at running the ball while playing with pads against a defense on a football field. And so my initial approach was to try to kind of like isolate things as much as possible in the available data to kind of be reflective or revealing of traits. This is easy when you have stuff like missed tackles force data from Pro Football Focus. And their approach was definitely something that I was inspired by. They generated metrics out of the film itself. And also by Matt Waldman, who was kind of meticulously charted things in his own film study. And so it kind of grew from that into eventually like developing these box adjusted metrics using the data that became available to me once I started working with Nick Ercolano and BDGE. And then I got to a point where I felt like the gaps in my current analysis can only be, not that they were covering everything it was possible to cover using numbers, but as far as in terms of how I was approaching it, the gaps in my analysis need to be filled by film study at this point. And so I started doing that. I studied is a really, kind of honorific way to put it, but I dove into like YouTube breakdowns of like different rushing schemes and Matt Waldman videos about like what to look for in running back evaluation and stuff, and just kind of, I don't know, kind of taught myself what I should be looking for, and then developed my own charting system that I'm then able to kind of derive metrics from. So I think my approach to data analysis is pretty film-like, and my approach to film study is pretty like data centric, and I think it creates a good mix.
And did that kind of come from trying to win leagues, or was it just like it just completely sprung out of creating content in the first place?
Yeah, it didn't really spring out of trying to win leagues. I've been in a couple Dynasty leagues. I'm not currently in any, but my interest in like running backs specifically, and in evaluating running backs and publishing content about them, was always kind of independent of my dabblings in fantasy football. I think I'm pretty independently interested in just kind of trying to figure out who the best players are, and then Uh,
Right.
the capacity in which a market exists for that information is fantasy football. So that's kind of how the angle I take. But really, you could take fantasy football out of it, and I'd be just as interested.
Right. So, like, I got my start in kind of like an analytics based brain space with Sabre, the Society for American Baseball Research, and Bill James and his groundbreaking analytics stuff, where he's looking beyond the box score, blah blah blah. So it was really an interest in kind of the inner workings of what happens in sports. And at the time, baseball was the primary source for analytics research.
Mhm.
As a through line through the space, most people start, and it's like fantasy competitiveness kind of drives them to start like getting into content creation, or rather drives them to get into like kind of a deeper understanding of the game and statistics and what they're looking at to try and find that edge. But yours was just pure interest, not edge. And that's very rare. I don't ever really talk to anybody who's like that. You just love it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's that really does something for my ego. I like when you said that. Yeah, I grew up watching like the old like NFL films VHS tapes. The one that I loved the most was the greatest ever running backs. It kind of like went all through like back to Red Grange, like through up to when it was made in 1997, like Thurman Thomas, Emmett Smith. So I just like loved watching that, and I think my appreciation for running backs or whatever was kind of very much influenced by that. I think in hindsight, I think NFL films has this very like cinematic and like orchestral way of presenting, and it's all in slow mo and like it's kind of poetic language. So I think I
Yeah.
gained like an aesthetic appreciation for running the ball, and I think it it strikes me as like the purest of sporting things. Like, take this ball, go way over there while a bunch of other people try to stop you. Like, that's just such a fundamental thing to incorporate into a game.
It's the basis of football, period.
Yeah. So it just it's attractive to me in kind of like a from just like a base level. And then I also grew up on Madden, and Madden was cool in that it had like an entire like a comprehensive database of skill ratings and like traits and attributes, and it was all about not just how good is this guy, but like what does he do stylistically different from other players at his same position. And so I think being able to quantify that on Madden and in like the old ESPN Pro Football encyclopedias and stuff, like just kind of fused with the NFL films influence. And I'm interested in it kind of from both angles.
Right. So I want to go back a little bit to like the fundamental aspect of football. And obviously, like, it was all running. I mean, with the origin of the game, the early years of the game, before really the 1960s, like running backs were the focus, halfbacks and tailbacks, fullbacks, whatever formation you were using, but like matriculating the ball down the field by handing it off to somebody and trying to have the big uglies move each other out of the way to give them as much space as possible. That was like the object of the game. And obviously it's a derivative of other kind of ball in hand games like rugby and stuff like that. Do you get into rugby at all? Have you ever seen Irish hurling, which is the greatest spectator sport of all time? What's your exposure to other similar types of games?
Yeah, not a ton really. I have like looked at rugby highlights like on YouTube. And they satisfy some of the same thing because it is running the ball and trying to get from here to there while other people try to stop you. Um, but yeah, I haven't like gotten into other sports really. It's football. I like basketball, but yeah, really it has always just been mostly football.
So for you and all the viewers, and I don't get, I take every opportunity to pump up this game as much as possible. But check out on YouTube Irish Hurling, Hurling, just like vomit. Basically, it's a stick and ball game like field hockey, played on a soccer pitch with a soccer goal and a football goalpost. It is similar to Gaelic football, which is kind of like rugby. They have a round ball and they run around and they throw it. But with hurling, they have these long sticks.
Don't they kick it to themselves in Gaelic football?
Yeah. Now, moving on to what you were talking about before, explain Eddie Lacy.
Explain Eddie Lacy. Like,
yeah.
I think Eddie Lacy was good. Like, I think the Eddie Lacy hate is Eddie Lacy prime erasure. He was legitimately good at Alabama. Like, he was one of the better Alabama running backs during that long run of good Alabama running backs.
He basically kicked it off.
Yeah. I mean, he was early on in that. And he was legitimately good with the Packers. He was the rookie of the year. He had another season after that was basically just as good. And he was a big guy, but he was kind of more built like Kareem Hunt early on in his career, where he was stout but not like chubby. And he could move. He had nimble feet. He was good in the screen game. He was good at running the ball. He was a load to tackle. And then he started gaining a little weight and fell off completely, and then went to Seattle and sucked. But I'm a fan of Eddie Lacy. I enjoyed the Eddie Lacy experience.
And I said that objectively, not like there's no Eddie Lacy slander here. I loved him too. And, like I'm a big guy. And so like I tend to gravitate towards bigger guys that can, like Pablo Sandoval of the Giants, Bartolo Colon, guys who are outsized and also athletic. Like that's my jam. You know what I mean? So
yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah. And I knew that would, hit a particular place in your heart, being a Packers fan and all that stuff. So I just wanted to talk about Eddie Lacy for a second. Any new or recent or upcoming Eddie Lacy player comps?
That's an interesting question. Any upcoming Eddie Lacy player? Well, let me look here real quick. I'd say the guys in this class who I'd say are most like Eddie Lacy. I'll give you three. Audric Estime has some Eddie Lacy to him. I don't think he's quite that mobile, but they're on the same branch of the running back family tree, roughly. Ray Davis is sort of like a small Eddie Lacy. Not that he's small, but he's a little bit smaller. And then Mayan Williams, this might be the best Eddie Lacy comp. I think he runs a little bit hard. Not that Eddie Lacy didn't run hard, but Mayan Williams runs especially hard. And I think he has a little bit more of that than Eddie Lacy does, but they're both big, round guys who kind of bounce off people. So
yeah, that's, I was hoping that you would say Estime, because I like him a lot, and not purely because he's high in your rankings, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. All right. So before we kind of move into what's going on with this 2024 rookie class for the Dynasty Pulse on the Fantasy Football Plus Network, shout out to Bradley Stalder, a player profiler, my boss. Matt Kelly is my boss, and Bradley is a really great guy. But I finish every episode of the Fantasy Burn with a Power 5 ranking. So you have been, you guys, we talked a little bit before I started recording, and Noah explained that one of his goals for this year was to read and watch movies more. So from 5 to 1, the movies that you've seen in the last 4 months, 3 months and 4 days, what are your top 5 films that you've watched in the last few months?
Yeah, well, let's see. I've watched 1, 2, 3. I've watched like 20 or something, 25. Okay. And I've also been rating them 1 to 5 stars. So I'll just give you my top 5.
Because you can't look at anything in the world without ranking or quantifying or whatever.
Exactly.
In this space, which is very safe, we don't call ourselves nerds. We call ourselves obscurists. Okay.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay. I should start at 5, right? And then go
5.
up to the
5
best.
to 1.
Okay. Let's go with, I said I would just read my top 5, but I have like 12 of them rated 4 stars. So I have to pick here.
Okay.
Let's go with The Holdovers. The Holdovers, we'll call that 5. Great movie.
That was, so for those of you who don't know, that's a Paul Giamatti film where he's stuck for a teacher at a private boarding school Northeast, and he's stuck with the holdover kids that don't have a family for this break. And there are coming of age elements of it. He's got to like figure out who he is, kind of thing. And Paul Giamatti is fantastic. The lunch lady is fantastic. The kids are great. Like it's a really, really great film, and everybody should watch it. So that's number 5.
Yeah, and it's funny. Yeah, it's definitely a good movie.
It's peak Paul Giamatti. We'll put it that way.
Number 4, I will say, Bridesmaids. Recently watched Bridesmaids for the first time. Had never seen it. I wish they made movies like this still. It's kind of like a romantic comedy relationship movie. It's very funny. Number 3, we will go with La La Land.
Okay, that's one I have not seen. I'm not a fan of musicals, and I have eschewed it from the beginning. But everybody that watches it likes it, and I'm like, okay, I'll let it. It's kind of like a Zero situation where, like, hey, it might be great. This guy might be good. He might be, a top 10 quarterback, but I'll let other people have that season.
Yeah, and I was kind of on the same page. I don't dislike musicals, but I'm not like into musicals, and so I never watched it. This was the first time I watched it was a couple weeks ago. It's got less music than I expected, and the performances are fantastic. It's shot beautifully. It like I would definitely recommend it whether you like musicals or not.
Dang it! I have to watch it.
Number 2, man, there's a lot I could go with, but I'm gonna go with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest at number 2. Great movie. Jack Nicholson in basically like an old school kind of mental asylum. Shenanigans ensue. It's also kind of there's some depth to it. You can definitely see the seeds of Jack Torrance in The Shining in Nicholson's character in this movie. So it's a lot of fun. And then the best movie I've seen this year.
Hang on. Let's because there's a lot of inside baseball stuff goings on with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like the fact that Kirk and Michael Douglas were part of the crew that brought it out to and made the film for everybody. Jack Nicholson with like a seminal performance that like basically put him on the map. And then the author of the book, which if I worked in psychiatry for 15 years, and I was a psychiatric counselor in lockdown facilities. And there are 2 films that most closely resemble the environment there. And One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is one, even though it's outdated. And number 2 is this movie called Manic, which is a Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Don Cheadle thing from like 20 years ago. And it's adolescence in the psych facility. And it was the closest thing to like a documentary of my job. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the writer Ken Kesey had a dairy farm not very far from you where they started producing Nancy's yogurt, which was one of the few yogurts because yogurt was like illegal because it was like cultured or something with the bacteria. So he was making Nancy's yogurt out of his dairy farm where the Grateful Dead used to play all kinds of concerts and stuff. And then they started selling yogurt in Oregon in the 1960s. A dude who would truck in the 70s from San Francisco area up to Oregon, go to Nancy's, get a load of yogurt, bring it back, and distribute it to all the health food stores. one of which in San Anselmo, Marin County, my mom shopped at. But the driver of that truck was Huey Lewis from Huey Lewis in the News. And that's all close to Idaho, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry. And the number one, let me real quick. Let me see if I have, because I normally do use EV Mux for this show, and I don't have it. Normally I have a drum roll, but we'll go ahead and cut that part out of it. So Noah Hills of NoMoreParties.com. That's NoahMoreParties. Just like it's spelled like the words, but it's not phonetic. NoMoreParties.com. All of the best running back content, and I think it even says it on the website. Let me get to that header real quick. You know it by heart, but
oh yeah.
Oh no, why isn't it showing? It's the best. What is it?
The best running back evals on the planet.
There you go. Okay. And so nomoreparties.com, the best running back evals on the planet. Everybody go to that and get your archive done for the month of April and have seriously, it's really, really good shit. So Noah, you've seen in the last 3 months.
Yeah, the best movie I've seen in the last 3 months is Goodfellas. Probably like the fourth time I've seen it. Always liked it. I think this time I appreciated it the most that I ever have. Like I feel like it's one that you kind of want to come back to and sit with and yeah, it really hit for me this time. 5 stars.
There are so many iconic scenes like killing the guy in the trunk, and when he's getting ready to go to the airport with the bags of cocaine, and he's driving around town, and the helicopter is above his head, and he's got to go pick up the babysitter and all that stuff. Phenomenal. When his wife confronts him in the bed with the gun, just like Kiren, it's so good. It's such a masterpiece and an icon of classic American cinema. Martin Scorsese is a genius. Yeah, that's phenomenal. I'm going to throw in one for everybody out there. Have you seen Pretty Things? Or Pretty Things? What the hell is wrong with my brain? Poor Things.
Poor Things. I have seen Poor Things. I also rated it 4 stars. It easily could have been in my top 5. I thought it was very good.
I thought it was phenomenal. Yorgos Lanthimos is one of my favorite directors who's working now. If you haven't seen The Lobster, Killing of a Sacred Deer, The Favorite, the other movies that he's made, go check that out over the next couple months while you're doing your 2024 movie watching. Everything he does is pretty phenomenal. Especially The Lobster and Killing of a Sacred Deer. Those are just bizarre.
I have seen The Lobster, enjoyed it, not as much as I enjoyed Poor Things, but I have not seen Killing of the Sacred Deer. I didn't even realize it was also him, so I'll have to
it's
check that out.
Super good. Nicole Kidman, Colin Farrell, the Barry Keoghan from
he's fantastic.
Yeah, from Saltburn and
Banshees of Inisherin. He was
Dunkirk. Yeah,
Banshees of Inisherin.
Yes, that and another Colin Farrell movie. That's one of those films where you watch it and you're like, I don't need to watch it again.
Yeah. Good, but yeah, not one that you want to like, oh man, I need to watch that again.
Right. Oh, I have to see that scene where he gets beat up again. We're going to talk about this upcoming rookie class and just Dynasty in general. So looking at your rankings in Dynasty, you have Brees over Bijan, and that doesn't line up with ADP. I know that the last time you updated was a couple weeks ago, and I was using like today's Fantasy Pros ADP, but Breece Hall and Bijan. What, like, you have Breece over Bijan? Why?
Yeah, I think anybody who has Bijan over Breece, I wouldn't argue with that. And I think
Okay.
if I when I sit down to update the rankings next, maybe it'll strike me that maybe Bijan should be a little bit ahead. So it's not a huge distinction, and one that I would like defend with my life, but I do think it's defensible. I think they're close enough in age that like Bijan's 1 year difference there doesn't really matter that much. I think they are. Bijan probably just got a long-term quarterback upgrade, given that Kirk Cousins seems like he'll be around longer than Aaron Rodgers will. But I think they're like, we don't have like one of them isn't in like a way better situation, and I don't think we can say that Bijan is definitely a better player than Breece Hall. I think the things that Bijan was supposed to be coming out were a workhorse guy with a ton of athleticism who could break tackles and who could be used as like a downfield weapon in the passing game. That seems to be what he is. Like, I think he's as advertised, but I think Breece Hall also fulfills all of that criteria. Like, he's also a workhorse sized guy with a lot of athleticism who breaks a ton of tackles, who can be used downfield in the passing game. I don't know that we necessarily knew that when he was coming out, but turns out, especially his usage from his rookie year, he was used all over the place in the passing game. I haven't looked at the numbers closely from last season, but he played well last year, especially at the end of the year. So I don't think we have any reason to think that Bijan Robinson is like definitely better than Breece Hall. I think there are just as many reasons to think that Breece Hall might be better than Bijan. So they're very equivalent talents and very equivalent dynasty assets in my mind.
And one of the things that I'm huge on the Breece Hall hype train, and one of the things that I've used over the last year or so to kind of really just strengthen my idea of him is I look at the first 4 weeks of his rookie season and then the last 12 weeks of last year, or 13 weeks, and I put those together as the Breece Hall season. And that's how I look at him. And I kind of like take out the injury era. And so over the course of those 17 games, there aren't a lot of guys who have had 17 game stretches that were that good. And I know that based on like your player modeling and everything, he was in that class with like Saquon Barkley and like generational talents.
Yeah.
And I love me some Breece. I had another question. Kiren in your top 10. How is that a switch over the course of 2 years? Like, is it just a usage thing? Because, I mean, his talent didn't change. Nothing changed except for his usage rate.
Yeah, I think part of it is that I was way too low on him coming out. And I don't really have like a good way of like retroactively kind of reconciling my evaluation with how good he ended up being. I think he slipped through the cracks and was better than I thought he'd be. And the people who knew that were people who were watching film. I guess I'll give a small shout out. Well, not small shout out, quick shout out, big shout out to David Wilsey, who also does good work with running backs, who, if I'm not mistaken, was in on Kyren Williams based on his analytical profile. So whatever approach David uses definitely worked on Kyren Williams. But for the most part, the people who were in on Kyren Williams or fans of Kyren Williams were people who watched film. I know Ray Garvin was a big fan. They knew that he was a good pass protector. They liked what he was doing at the line of scrimmage and in making people miss, even though whatever he was doing didn't produce good like efficiency numbers using the metrics that I like to look at. And he, like, everybody knew he was going to be, functional in the passing game, and we haven't seen him really used to his full potential in that way in the NFL. But the other things he does well, like pass protecting, holding onto the ball, just kind of doing what he needs to do at the line of scrimmage and not making mistakes, I think we're really in the right place at the right time with Sean McVay and the Rams running back room in the last couple of years, where their main guy was like the direct opposite in Cam Akers, who was athletic and exciting, but frustrating, I think, in the way that he would run the ball. Like, I don't think he's the most natural runner at the line of scrimmage. And I think Sean McVay didn't really want to put up with that. He didn't want to have different people come in on third downs. And Kiren Williams was able to kind of fix all of those problems and was really good on the ground. So I think I'm just kind of taking the L at this point. And my strongest copium for this one is I wasn't watching film. Maybe if I had been, I would have been a little bit more in on him. But my process at the time just completely missed on Kiren Williams. And I still don't think he's like some sort of elite talent. Like, I think he's probably, comparable to how good like Austin Eckler is, where he's just kind of been like, I'm a big Austin Eckler fan, but like, we can be honest and say that he's been a very, underqualified bell cow the last few years after just kind of falling into this role by virtue of being dependable and being able to catch the ball. And he can kind of do everything. Kiren Williams is kind of the same way. And so I think he's in a situation under Sean McVay where he has the trust of the coaching staff and has job security because of that. But he's not a guy who in any situation, or if McVay decided he wanted to go be, just date Instagram models for the rest of his life and retired tomorrow, I don't know that Kiren Williams would have the same level of job security just based on his talent alone, but he's definitely been way better than I thought he'd be. Right.
So now, why is Isaiah Spiller the next Kiren Williams? I'm kidding. Okay, so this is a question that really hits close to home because my co-host right here on the Dynasty Pulse, Mike Greinberg, aka FF Canuck 99, we are in an Undroppables Dynasty startup, and we're looking at the 5-10 coming up in a few picks. And I have Rashad White targeted to pair with Travis Etienne, and he is trying to push Josh Jacobs. So tell me what I can say to him to convince him that Rashad White is the proper pick and Josh Jacobs is not. And this is a dynasty startup.
Well, first of all, I don't necessarily think that Rashad White is the better pick, but if I was constructing an argument, I think you just point to Josh Jacobs' 2022 season where he stunk. He was terrible. Or not 2022, 2023. He was great in 2022. He stunk in 2023, and now he's in Green Bay, change of scenery. But I haven't seen any legitimate explanation for why he stunk last year, other than the Raiders were bad. But
it was a Josh McDaniels thing.
But Zamir White didn't stink that bad.
That was he came out when Antonio Pierce was the head coach and Bo Hardigree was the offensive coordinator. So It was a complete regime change, and it was a totally different season than when Jacobs started.
And Jacobs, to be fair, Jacobs was more efficient after Pierce took over. Right, and which is why I have Jacobs over White in my dynasty rankings, I think, because I'm generally bought into the idea. I'm willing to trust the wisdom of the crowds on Jacobs not being cooked, even though I think that's, there's a possibility there. But if you are trying to sell White over Jacobs, I think you have to align yourself in the territory where Jacobs is probably cooked. There's no reason Rashad White can't do what he did last season in 2024, but.
Yeah, I did that. And one of the reasons I brought it up is because this won't even be seen by anybody else before we get to make the pick. So it'll all come out in the wash. All right. So let's move on to this 2024 rookie class. Now, the rankings that you have don't totally line up with consensus, I guess. There are some interesting things that are in there. Your number one in the class is
My number one in the class is Blake Corum.
Okay. So as far as kind of looking at everything and looking forward to the kind of career that he's going to be able to have, most people who are really high on Blake Corum are very high on him because of the potential for him going to the Chargers. So independent of that landing spot, he's still your number one.
Yeah. My current rankings until the NFL draft kind of strictly reflect who do I think are the best players. So they're sort of related to fantasy football, but also I think in a way independent of fantasy football in that you might think of it as who are the best running backs in terms of their potential to score fantasy points, but that's in a vacuum of their own skill sets rather than projecting draft capital. So yeah, I think I just think Blake Corum's the best running back in the class.
Okay. And so the fact that he and Donovan Edwards both had declines in their performance as far as yards per carry and things like that, which seemed to be more of a function of the University of Michigan offensive line and play scheming. The fact that he's coming off an injury, or he was coming off an injury last year, it's probably not necessarily going to be something that holds.
Yeah, I don't think so. I did quite a bit of research as far as lay research can go, I think, into meniscus tears and the different type of surgeries and recovery rates and these studies that were available online about European soccer athletes and professional athletes from all sorts of different sports. I'm pretty encouraged by what I found in that research, and I think Blake Corum's going to be fine going forward. Kind of the keys you want to see from guys if they're going to incur a meniscus injury is you want it to happen when they're young. You want them to get the particular kind of surgery that Corum got. And then the benchmarks that we typically see from people who had those surgeries are that they return to the same level of play within a year or so, that they don't suffer a significant decline long term in terms of their for soccer athletes, like goals per minute or whatever, goals per game. And Blake Corum returned in less than a year. He had the right surgery. He's young, and his yards per carry and things like that went down. He was clearly a physically diminished version of himself, but he definitely returned to play at the same level in terms of level of competition, and he was clearly still an effective back at the level at which he was playing.
Right, and again, Donovan Edwards, he had a very similar decline, and I think it had more to do with that University of Michigan team than with the performance of those two guys. There was something else that carried over to the two of them that was independent of them. I'm not finding the right words, but which means it likely could have been something independent of those two guys.
Yeah, and well, also I should point out, I've seen reports. I don't know if they're verified or what, but that Donovan Edwards suffered some sort of injury early on in the season himself that slowed him down. So both of those guys might have been playing hurt to a certain extent during the season. But as far as situations in college football go, I mean, playing behind the Michigan offensive line is not a bad gig.
Right.
But those guys, especially Corum, saw some of the heaviest defensive fronts of anybody in college football in terms of high volume running backs in the last, at least 5 years. Like that's a pro style rushing attack, heavy on like duo and inside zone. Like he's running up the middle, frequently in short yardage, frequently against 7, 8, 9-man boxes, 250 times last year. Like he had quite the workload and held up post-injury, was an effective player, even though he was physically diminished. Like I think we should be encouraged by his last season in school, by the information available to us about meniscus recovery, and by the player he was pre-injury, because he was really damn good beforehand.
Fair enough. And what about Jalen Wright, on the other hand, as far as loaded boxes?
Yeah, Jalen Wright doesn't know what a loaded box is. He was regularly running into 6-5-man boxes. He had the lightest box counts, really, of any high volume running back in college football last year. That the Tennessee offense is just it's a carnival. They're just so spread out and different things spinning and going back and forth. But Jalen Wright, I do think, is a good running back in terms of the things that you can evaluate outside of really having no idea whether he can read a defensive front. Other than that, he seems good. He's fast. He breaks tackles well. He's got a really good balance. So I do like him as like Jacob Sanderson. I was on their podcast like last week, the Dynasty Points podcast. I think he pulled out a Ronald Jones comp, which, yeah, Ronald Jones is a joke now, but Ronald Jones could run the ball. He did it well in the NFL. And if Jalen Wright can catch the ball better than the numbers kind of indicate he could in a weird Tennessee offense where he really didn't get to do that much. Yeah, but like, why can't he be, I don't know. Why can't he be a guy who touches the ball 10 times a game and is good?
Right. And do you have any other exemplars in your model of guys that have come before that really didn't see very heavy box numbers but had good seasons, but because of the light boxes, that kind of didn't translate, and they seemed to struggle once they got into the NFL? Are there examples like that you can think of?
Yeah, Jalen Wright was kind of the first guy where it like really struck me how light these boxes he was running into were. I've been paying attention to this in terms of the numbers for a little bit now, but in terms of it kind of being front of my mind while I'm thinking about a player, really only Jalen Wright. But in hindsight, that has made me think of Zach Evans, who I think is still good, but those Ole Miss offenses are also pretty wide open, and his average box counts at Ole Miss were not that light. Like, they weren't Jalen Wright levels of light, but they were pretty light. Like among high volume runners in college football in 2022, Zach Evans saw, I don't know, bottom 5 defensive fronts. And I thought he showed an ability to manipulate defenders at the line of scrimmage and read, kind of shifting leverage and make good decisions for the most part. He did have some, creative tendencies that went wrong sometimes, but I thought I had a better grasp of how good Zach Evans was at the line of scrimmage, because I think he was a more like active participant in that process than Jalen Wright seems to be. But again, it wasn't top of my mind when I was evaluating Zach Evans. And I do think about it in hindsight as like, maybe there was something, or maybe there would have been something there if I had kind of thought to look into it. But that being said, I still think Zach Evans would be good if he got some legitimate opportunity.
Yeah, and I think the season that Kiren Williams had is kind of the season that everybody kind of anticipated coming from Zach Evans, where,
Right.
kind of taking over in the second half of the season and, and finishing with, pretty good running back standings. So real quickly, I want to go over some of the combine results, and not go over it, but talk about some of the combine results. And this is coming from Sumer Sports, and they released a chart of combine information and draft value correlation along with performance. And the top 2 corollaries for running backs, and this is something that you brought up in terms of wanting to look at the other kinds of things besides the pillars of running back evaluation, but still, and what has played out is the pillars of running back evaluation have been age and weight. So with that said, and looking over your 2024 rankings, there are really three guys in the top 10, 15 who are under 21 years of age entering the draft, and that's Jonathan Brooks, Audric Estime, and Bralan Allen. Estime we'll get to, and you talked a little bit about him in the first segment. Jonathan Brooks, I think there's kind of this idea that post injury, he likely is the most talented guy that's out there. So, like in a dynasty situation, if you're drafting a running back, he's like Corum and Jonathan Brooks are last year's JSN and Jordon how to get the work early. But JSN is kind of the more talented. Would you say that is a similar analogy for Jonathan Brooks? He's better than Blake Corum, but he's going to have a slower start in the NFL.
I don't think that's how. I don't think I necessarily agree with that. I think
Okay.
I think independent of the injury for either player, I think Corum. I prefer him slightly to Brooks, but in different situations, I might like in an outside zone scheme, give me Brooks over Corum. Not because I don't think Corum could do it, but because Brooks is particularly well suited to that type of offense. So in that capacity, I prefer him to Corum. But just kind of in a vacuum, who do I think is overall better? Give me Corum, but not by a ton. I am a fan of Jonathan Brooks. But I will say about the injury, about his in particular, Corum is getting a lot of flack for having been allegedly bad last season. And according to a lot of tackle breaking, yards through contact, things like that metrics, he was bad. But I think we can plainly attribute that to him recovering after a meniscus tear in surgery.
Because he wasn't before.
Right.
He wasn't
right.
bad before.
He was good at those things before. Brooks was excellent last year, got hurt, now is, recovering from his own injury and surgery, which is an ACL, not a meniscus. So it's a little different, whatever. And I think we've been kind of trained to treat ACLs as if they're kind of nothing nowadays. Like, give him 8 months, he'll be fine. Like, what do I care? But not every guy is great right away. Not everybody heals the same way. Like, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Brooks is definitely the same guy, or, let's say he goes in the third round to some team and he's slow out of the gate and some veteran kind of inches their way in and Brooks never really gets going. Like, what is a team? They're not married to Jonathan Brooks in the third round if he has a slow rookie season. Like I don't think, I'm not predicting any of this. I think he's a good player. I think he's going to be good. I like him. I don't think there's enough caution surrounding the injury.
Okay. That is a flag plant too. All right. So with all of the age and weight kind of correlation, Bralan Allen is down at your number 9. I have been just kind of, and again, I don't do the kind of research that you do. I read you. But we have a saying, we do the work so you don't have to, and you do the work so I don't have to. But Bralan Allen has been like my favorite guy in the class for a while. I haven't moved off, and I haven't seen anything that has moved me off of that. He fits the age. He fits like the top 12 bell cow physical profile. So if you're going into a rookie draft, RB9, that seems undraftable at a certain point. That's like a taking him in the 4th round kind of area. What are your thoughts on Bralan Allen moving forward? And I know you had him very high. What caused the slip?
Yeah, I feel like I'm tentatively a fan of Bralan Allen. I actually today just finished an article on him, so that'll come out probably by the time this comes out. So a lot of my thoughts on Bralan Allen will be on the website. But he is my RB9 right now, but I will say there are probably 8 or 9 guys that in this class could, in the right circumstances, given the right development, I think produce like low end, at least RB1s or like high end RB2s in fantasy. Like I think they could become starting running backs in the NFL and be productive. All of those guys could also end up being role players and like not start. So there's a world in which Bralan Allen's the best running back in this class, and I don't think that's crazy. Like it's not impossible for him to reach his ceiling in a good situation, and everybody else to kind of settle in as role players. So I don't think he's like way worse than everybody I have above him. But I think he's interesting in that some of the criticisms I see levied against him sort of makes sense. He doesn't run with as much power as you'd expect from a guy his size. He is a little bit lumbering and awkward in his movements at times. He is an inexperienced, like pure runner just because he's a positional convert and a young guy and, all that stuff. But I also think if we remove our expectations about what a guy his size should move like whatever we think that is, or how much power they should have, I think Bralan Allen is not bad. Like he's good through contact. He's a good tackle breaker, in the grand scheme of things. And guys like AJ Dillon, Derrick Henry, Najee Harris, like how many big backs, tall guys who run kind of high have we seen get cut down at the line of scrimmage and stumble around a little bit more than we'd like them to? Like these guys,
Right.
It just kind of comes with the territory of being 6'1", 6'2", and 235 plus pounds. These guys, they don't move around like Jahmyr Gibbs does. And so I think that criticism is not unique to Bralan Allen among players in his archetype, and is kind of, it seems unfair to me that he's so, like in some corners of fantasy Twitter or draft Twitter, whatever, it kind of seems like he's ridiculed for being like not running hard or like going down to it. It's like
and 2 years ago, he was the golden child.
Right. And I also think it's become kind of cool to not like Bralan Allen because people who loved him when he was a freshman, the people who view themselves as like the real football knowers, the real ball knowers, could be like, he's not that good. He's not developed. He's just big and fast. You don't know what you're looking at. And that's kind of that sentiment I perceive has kind of preserved itself over the last few years. But I didn't find him to be like an especially mistake prone runner at the line of scrimmage in 2022 or 2023. He was running completely different offensive schemes in those 2 years. I put a video up on Twitter today, a little compilation of him like moving around the line of scrimmage. He's pretty slick and has decent agility for a guy his size. And again, I don't think he doesn't have a problem with his power. Like, he could put his shoulders down more often and gain more yards through contact than he currently does. But he's not like Jonathan Brooks goes down way easier than Bralan Allen does, and nobody complains about that because he's not 235 pounds and they don't expect it out of him. But Bralan Allen, that doesn't suddenly that's like a negative on his profile when really he's got above average power. I think he's a fine player.
And that speaks to that. Wrapping up. That'll be the bow. By contrast, you have Audric Estime as your number 3 rank. And similar kind of story, early production, young age, larger guys. Estime is 10 pounds lighter than Allen, something like that. Yeah. And Estime got just shit on for his combine, his 40 speed, which isn't necessarily as corollary at the running back position as people want to believe. So talk to me about the differences, but what separates Estime from Bralan Allen?
Yeah, I think where Bralan Allen, at this point in his development, I view him as kind of he's kind of like, for better or worse, just he's playing it by the book as far as I can tell. Like, he's not trying to make creative decisions at the line of scrimmage. I think because he knows he doesn't have a great grasp of, concepts and what to. I think he's just like, all right, if I be creative, I'll fuck it up. So I'll just do what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
Audric Estime is a much more active decision maker at the line of scrimmage in a way that benefits him. He also played behind a good offensive line, but he's excellent at finding holes that don't look obviously open, but are, or manipulating defenders out of position to create open lanes. Like, he just does the value adding things at the line of scrimmage way better than Bralan Allen does, even though I don't think Bralan Allen does them poorly. He just kind of doesn't do them. He's just kind of a passive participant. And Estime, I think, is a little bit more fluid athletically than Bralan Allen is, which is saying something, because I do think Bralan Allen is pretty fluid athletically. But I think Estime's bad moments in that area are less frequent than Bralan Allen's. Allen is kind of inconsistent. I also think Audric Estime, at least this is what the numbers say, and what I, my perusal through his film did not change this opinion. He seems to be good in pass pro, and he catches the ball cleanly. Like, he's not he's not Jahmyr Gibbs out in the passing game either, but he can catch, he can orbit around the pocket and catch dump offs. And I think he can pass protect, and he's a big dude. And yes, he's not that fast. But if anybody's evaluation of Audric Estime, film evaluation at least, depended on him being very fast, like, I don't understand what you were watching if, like, that's what you needed to be in on him. That's not his game. Right. He's not going to rip off 60-yard touchdowns, but
But also, he has been GPSed in the open field at, like an elite speed. So I get a similar vibe with Bralan Allen to some of the guys that have come out in the last couple of years. Kenneth Walker, I think Damian Pierce to a certain extent, and Zamir White. So especially Zamir White, and not in and only in this term, guys who don't have a lot of pass catching volume opportunity in their scheme in the NCAA, but aren't incompetent at it on the NFL level. There was a knock on Kenneth Walker coming out that he didn't catch a lot of passes. There was a knock on Zamir White that James Cook was the pass catcher in that backfield. But when both of them are pressed to it, they both can do it. With Allen and Estime, are they kind of in a similar sphere where they weren't tasked a lot with it, but they don't necessarily show that they're idiots when it comes to catching the ball?
Yeah, I think yes in some ways and no in some others. I think Allen also strikes me as a decent pass protector. He's big, he's willing, he seems to, like, I'm not the pass pro guy, but when just kind of as I'm noting mentally as I watch film, Allen seems to do it well. And when I search up Bralan Allen pass pro on Twitter, the drones seem to agree that he's good at this. So I think that's a way that both of them could get on the field, even if they're not viewed as like the primary receiving options, which I don't think either of them will be. I do think Estime has a little bit better hands than Bralan Allen does. He just seems like he strikes me as feeling less comfortable catching the ball. Also might have been his quarterback. I haven't looked into that particular aspect of it. Maybe he was being thrown a lot of inaccurate passes. But there were some times on film where he didn't catch the ball super cleanly, but there were some other times on film. One particular play against, I want to say it was Iowa or Illinois. He ran like an angle route over the middle of the field, like crossed a guy over, got open and caught the pass, which is that's advanced stuff. So I think
right.
he has the movement skills for it. And I don't want to ever write a professional or a soon to be professional athlete off as not being able to catch a ball because right. I think these guys can catch balls, but maybe he's thinking too much or not familiar with route concepts or whatever. But he struck me as a little bit less natural of a receiver than Estime. But yeah, movement skills, I think he's got them, and he seems to be decent in pass pro.
Little ADD, maybe the ball's coming and you're thinking about where's the linebacker, that kind of thing. All right. So not necessarily where you rank, but who are 3 standouts in the class that that you would suggest targeting in a dynasty startup draft?
Yeah, I think we talked about Corum and Brooks a little bit. Another guy I'd point out is Will Shipley, who I just recently finished evaluating, and I wasn't expecting to be as kind of in on him as I am, because his numbers, especially from last year, really aren't very good.
Neither was Clemson, though.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm willing to chalk it up to that pretty readily at this point, especially because Phil Moffitt played pretty well last year, despite that offense being bad. But I think Shipley is excellent on inside zone runs, especially against light defensive fronts, which is mostly what he saw. But if we're, kind of looking at him as like maybe a third down specialist or a guy who's going to play mostly in passing situations, which he certainly has the skill set to do that. He's very smooth as a receiver, as a route runner. He catches the ball like outside the frame of his body really well. He can beat defenders in coverage downfield. He's one of the better receiving backs in this class, I think. And so if those are the situations where he's on the field, I also think he can earn a little bit more rushing volume, because he legitimately knows what he's doing at the line of scrimmage. He's excellent at pressing close to his blocks, is the word I'm looking for. Pressing close to his blocks, manipulating defenders out of position, being really efficient with his movements and kind of like scraping off his blocks and getting upfield, like navigating from gap to gap as leverage shifts. Like he just knows what he's doing on inside zone runs and makes the most of them. And then he is elusive out in space. I know his missed tackles force numbers aren't that great. He doesn't have a ton of power, but he's got really nice like crossover moves, jump cuts, dead legs. He's a really kind of versatile mover out in the open. And so the comp that I kind of landed on with Shipley was Austin Eckler. And again, we talked about earlier that Austin Eckler was just kind of an underqualified bell cow. And I don't expect Shipley to get bell cow volume in the NFL. I think he's probably best suited to a role as like a third down role player. But I also think that of Austin Eckler, but Austin Eckler was able to graduate into more volume or just kind of fall into more volume because he was dependable at the line of scrimmage and, did things correctly while also being a great third down option. And if we're looking at like Bucky Irving does not have that in his range of outcomes. He is strictly a third down back, or this Dylan Laube guy or Dylan Laub, however you say his name. I've only watched him a little bit because there's not a ton of film available. He seems to be more of a project as a runner than Shipley. And then if you compare Shipley to these, Nyheim Hines types or James Cook, I think is a decent comp for Will Shipley. Honestly, I think Will Shipley is more capable of doing the things that the Bills are asking of James Cook on early downs than James Cook is himself.
But really, let's just keep it at like just three guys. So Will Shipley's one. Who's another guy that you can kind of like? It's not out of the range of possibilities to kind of like outperform. And I think what's really fascinating about Shipley right now is that he's kind of been discounted out in the sphere for a while, and the more people are starting to dig into the class, the more people are coming out and going, you know what? I think there's something there with Shipley, right? When he was almost ignored before. So another couple guys that you feel like they're gonna outperform their steam. Maybe a guy who does one thing really well, but he can get locked into like a role that's productive, that kind of thing. So just a couple more guys.
Yeah, I think Kimani Vidal is he seems to be gaining some steam. I know Matt Waldman's a fan. I've seen some other people say nice things about him on Twitter. But he just seems like such a solid guy. I mean, he's like less than 5'8", 213 pounds. So physically, he's super solid. He blew up the combine. He ran like 4.46, close to 80th percentile in the jumps and the agility drills. I don't think those things match his tape, specifically the speed and the agility, but he definitely has like a strong lower body. He does a great job of getting low and just churning his legs for extra yardage. He bounces off people. He's kind of Corum-like on the interior, where he just does a really good job of being where he needs to be and navigating efficiently in terms of like using his space. I do think he's a little bit clunkier of a mover in terms of his footwork and his transitions and things like that, especially than Corum. But compared to his like agility times, I don't think he's quite that agile on the field. But he's dependable on the interior. He's a load to bring down. He caught like 92 passes in college. He's very Devin Singletary, CJ Anderson fusion-ish.
Go Bears. Anybody from Cal, I'm gonna steam up.
Patrick Laird.
I love Patrick Laird, and I followed him to New Orleans and Miami, and wish that he had gotten. Yeah, I mean, he had some pretty big games in college. Didn't really translate to his role in the NFL.
But he made it to the NFL. He was
right, and he's stuck.
Wide receiver. Yeah. One more. I said Mayan Williams earlier, so I will not count that. But let me throw out Kendall Milton.
Okay.
This is a guy that I have not watched film on since I watched one game last summer. So that's a big caveat. But he's got good size, decent speed. Yeah, I think he ran like a 4.6. But his rushing efficiency numbers are nice, and he comes from helmet scouting, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. Georgia produces good NFL backs, even the guys who weren't that good at Georgia. Zamir White was kind of just okay at Georgia. That's kind of what Kendall Milton was. I would not be surprised if he is a better pro in the same vein as like Zamir White has already latched on as a solid RB2 and maybe the starting running back for an NFL team next year. I don't see why Kendall Milton couldn't do the same thing. I think he's at least from the numbers. He's not a smash prospect, but he's very solid.
Okay, so I said earlier that I was going to wrap up the 2024 class with a bow, and this is that bow. So we talk about in your rankings. There's a 6-7 player difference between Audric, Estime, and Bralan Allen. Bucky Irving is right there in the top 10. Blake Corum is the number 1. Frank Gore Jr. is down in the mid-teens. Kamani Vidal is there too. Isaac Garendo had a phenomenal combine. Mayan Williams and Kendall Milton are down there too. Amani Bailey's been talked up, although his combine basically like made him undraftable. Rasheen Ali was talked up for the Senior Bowl and then got hurt. So there's just a ton of guys and nothing to separate them. So it's almost like in this NFL draft is landing meaning the running back position, especially since it's a Jahmyr Gibbs and a Bijan Robinson, a Breece Hall. Like, if there is one person, like, there's nobody projected to be a first-round pick out of this class, except maybe Corum. But, I mean, the Chargers aren't taking him with the number 6 pick or number 5 pick or whatever. So, is it safe to say that, like, things aren't going to change much based on draft capital? It'll be more for situation and scheme and things like that.
Yeah, I think landing spot's definitely going to matter quite a bit. The way that draft capital could have the biggest effect is kind of in this, in that like tier of, 10 or so guys at the top. Like, if Jalen Wright ends up as the first running back off the board, I think he'll be the first running back in rookie drafts. If if Bralan Allen ends up as the first running back off the board, I think a lot more people are going to be like, well, the NFL liked him, so let's get on board.
Right.
Which that's not a bad approach. But I do think that would happen. If Blake Corum falls to like the 5th round or something, like maybe medicals didn't check out, or maybe teams just didn't like him, whatever. There's plenty of reason for him to fall to the end of that tier. So I think draft capital could have an effect, but I think we generally have an idea of there's these 8 or 9 or 10 or so guys who are probably there in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round range, and kind of the order in which they go doesn't say a ton other than, individual team preferences. But yeah, landing spots, I think will make a pretty big difference.
Okay. But you're going to see a lot more guys. You're not going to be able to differentiate. Okay, this guy has 3rd round capital and these guys were taken towards the back end of the draft. That's going to not mean as much in this new era of running backs. Starting to see a lot more guys who are coming out at 22. They're 4th year, 5th year running back guys. I wanted to talk about like Travion Henderson and Raheem Sanders in particular, because I think both of those guys were really steamed up to be part of the class. I think Travion Henderson might have been far and away the number 1 in this class if he had just come out and he chose to go back to school and compete with carries with another top 5 running back, which is like kind of crazy. So his paycheck must be pretty big. And then Raheem Sanders, another guy who was, he was rising up draft boards and mock drafts and things like that, had really struggled a lot behind a not so great Arkansas offensive line, got hurt, and he decided to go back to school and then transfer. So what is your take on how the landscape in the NCAA is changing? Like what was Travion Henderson thinking? Like how is it in our DEVEY startups when we're looking at guys who are senior running backs? What is to differentiate them from like incoming freshmen that are super talented? Do we want to not hang on to guys for 6 years, so focus on older running backs and not younger running backs? Like, what do you see with the college landscape right now?
Yeah, I think, NIL obviously has a ton to do with it, as does the kind of wide open transfer portal landscape. I think Henderson in particular could have thought he was, kind of slowed down for a little bit of the season, came on at the end. But in his mind, maybe, a really strong senior season where he's healthy and really clicking on all cylinders could make him a 1st round pick. Maybe. I think Sanders needed to go back. I think he was too hurt and too bad and too big probably last season for that to be, putting his best foot forward for the NFL. But in general, I think we're going to see more 4-year guys. I don't know how I feel about the breakdown between, is that going to be the top of each class, or is that going to be kind of like the middle, the middle class of college running backs who go back. But I do think that, especially with running backs struggling to get second contracts in the NFL on a consistent basis, just because it's often not a great investment versus just refilling in the draft or, whatever the alternative is. I think part of it is, if you can go back to school and make, I don't know what they're making, $750,000, some random kid somewhere, rather than go to the NFL early and like quickly make $4 million and then be done. Like maybe you try to cash in college as long as you can, because you're not sure about your second contract prospects in the NFL. But I also think something I'd be looking out for, specifically more related to the transfer portal rules, is guys who stay at a group of 5 program and are like, a 1,000-yard rusher, all Sun Belt or whatever it is for, multiple years in a row. You kind of got to wonder why why did he never jump ship and, end up at Kentucky, or why did he never transfer to Louisville, or, whatever it was? Like, why did he either not have those opportunities or not want to take them? Like I think increasingly it'll be a red flag for guys to just be a 4-year producer at a group of 5 program rather than a guy who proves himself there and then takes a jump like Ray Davis did. I think is a decent model for how those guys might work it. He took kind of a winding road, but starting at Temple, working his way up to the SEC is a good way to prove to NFL evaluators that the jump in competition, or it at least limits the calibrating they have to do for the jump in competition that you're going to have to experience going from college to the NFL. If you're playing in the SEC, that's much smaller. Where if you're playing in Conference USA, evaluators have to have a lot more questions about how athletic is he really? How can he adjust to the speed of the game? So guys who just kind of stay there, not that it necessarily says anything about their game, but I think it should be a little bit of a red flag going forward.
Or guys who start out at a Power 5 and then transfer to a smaller school.
Definitely bad sign. Definitely a bad sign.
So looking over your rankings for DEVEY, we have Travion Henderson at number 1, Omarion Hampton, who's part of the next wave, with Quinshawn Judkins at number 3, Ashton Jonty, CJ Baxter, Justice Haynes, Roderick Robinson, and then Ollie Gordon. So Ollie Gordon was probably the most steamed up out of everybody. Is there anything that differentiates him from the guys ahead of him, the 7 guys that you have ahead of him? And I know that you like Ollie Gordon. What does he need to do to kind of like plant himself in that top 3?
Yeah, I like Ollie Gordon. I haven't studied his film. I've seen him play, but I haven't sat down and really focused on it. He is a little bit of from that bit of watching him. He strikes me as a little bit of a lumberer as well in the backfield. He's not super agile back there, which limits him some. And while he was incredibly efficient and was just like a chunk play machine, he also was a little bit, he lagged a little bit behind his teammates in just like churning out positive outcomes on a down-to-down basis. So when he wasn't ripping off chunk plays, it was, 2-3 yards, 1 yard, 2 yards, which, to be fair, could just be a product of the kind of lumbering he was doing in the backfield. His offensive line also wasn't great. I think he led the country in rushing with an offensive line that PFF had rated as like 92nd in run blocking grade. So they were not good. I also think he's a good pass catcher. I don't think he's like a weapon in the passing game like somebody like Genty is. And so I like Ollie Gordon. I don't currently view him as having like an incredible ceiling.
Okay.
But I'm very willing to have my opinion changed in 2024. That'd be cool to see because he's a good player.
And DEVEY rankings are the most fluid of all of the rankings anyway. How about prospects for Trevor Etienne? He's going through some legal trouble. Granted, not as bad as Trey Hawley, who I wrote up right before the murder. I was like, yeah. So I was like huge on Trey Hawley, Louisiana State high school rushing leader for career. He was behind a couple guys at LSU, and I was like, in your DEVEY startups, go grab this guy because he's going to get his opportunity in the next couple of years, and then he's going to like hit the ground running and boost himself into the into the rookie drafts as like a very high, like you're going to want him in your campus Canton leagues. And then he was charged with murder. So I think Etienne is not quite in that same boat. He did get arrested. He's got some legal trouble. But Travis is his brother. He's got that kind of physical legacy. Do you see him like making some moves? Where are we looking at Trevor Etienne? Should we count on him for this season or like try and package him up? send him off to somebody else, make him somebody else's problem, or just kind of sit on him until he makes the transition?
Yeah, I don't have a good take related to the off-field stuff. That's always tough to navigate, and I think it kind of comes down to your level of risk tolerance, or what you want to do with those assets. But like on the field, I think he's exciting. I'm not sure he's an awesome prospect. Like I kind of view him in the I don't know, second or third tier of kind of yearly prospects, as maybe in the same mold as like this is not a player comp, but like a similar floor ceiling proposition as like a Tank Bigsby, where I think he definitely has talent and athletic ability, and he's explosive out in space. I'm not completely convinced by his analytical profile so far. Being at Georgia, assuming he ends up on the field and getting to play with a good team there, would presumably only help. But yeah, based on what he did at Florida early on, he's exciting, but I'm not sure that he has more substance than excitement.
So let other people cash in on his name and kind of, because there's kind of a balance that you have to take between steam or consensus, or kind of like, what the narrative is out there versus what a player actually encompasses. And so you have a guy like Brendan Rice, who he's a good wide receiver, and his dad is Jerry. So he's going to get some opportunities that he wouldn't necessarily have gotten if he wasn't Jerry Rice's kid. Frank Gore Jr., smaller school guy, but wasn't terrible, and he's going at a better safety than Gore Jr. Right? Travis's little brother. Everybody wants to kind of like, oh, he's going to be the next one, and sweep him in there, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and I think with Etienne, he's a DEVEY running back, and those are fairly volatile assets. It's not easy to tell how good a guy's going to be from the time he's a freshman or from the time he's a sophomore. So like, I think we have to approach a DEVEY asset like that with the knowledge that we're trying our best, but we don't really know that much about what kind of prospect this guy's going to look like until he actually declares. And even then, we're still trying to figure out how good he's going to be in the NFL. So we have very limited understanding of how good these guys are going to be. And so if there's extra uncertainty and risk introduced on top of that in the form of these like off-field issues, but that risk in the marketplace is offset by like name value that's sort of like keeping his price afloat, it seems like a fairly no-brainer move to me, or at least a low-risk move, to just kind of pass that asset onto somebody else who's willing to be excited based on athletic traits and name value, and you just kind of rinse and repeat with an asset that doesn't have the extra baggage attached to it.
Right. Okay. And again, the volatility of looking at DEVEY running backs and things like that. Would you say that guys who come in and produce as freshmen that maintain that production over their first 3 seasons have an advantage? And I'm speaking specifically of my favorite running back, University of California Bear, Jaden Ott. I've been watching him climb up rankings, and there's so little consensus on DEVEY rankings. So like, some people have him in the 50s, you have him in the 20s, but again, there's 100 programs out there, over 100 programs out there. He produces a freshman, he produces a true freshman, he produces a sophomore, and while I say he produced as a freshman, it's not like he didn't have bad games, but overall, the course of the season, he was like the number 2 running back in the Pac-12 as a freshman, behind Bucky Irving, I think, or at least he was up there. Sophomore season, at a certain point in the season, they were like, hey, we're going to have you run back some kicks. He takes the first one he ever returned to the house. But he's a guy who I think people are sleeping on a lot. And now he's going to make a transition out of the Pac 12, which is typically not a running back conference. It's more of a passing conference into the ACC. What are your thoughts on Jaden Ott?
Yeah, I'm not I'm not married to my opinion of Jaden Ott. I have not studied his film either, but I do think he checks some of the boxes we want to see. Several of them, actually. He should be like 5'11", 6 foot, 215-ish, 210-ish at the NFL. I think he's probably got 4.5, maybe a little bit better than that speed. And
even 4.5 is, I mean, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's good. And like you said, he has been productive from the time he was a freshman in a Power 5 conference. He's caught a lot of passes. So he has these elements of like, okay, if we're, the pillars of running back evaluation, I think he satisfies those. He looks good. I'm worried that he's more like Sean Tucker, Keyshawn Vaughn level prospect than he is, whatever the tier above that is.
Right.
Like these guys at these kind of, I mean, no shade to Berkeley, even though they rejected my law school application.
Oh,
no. No shade to Berkeley, but they're not an elite football school. And I think these guys that are at these kind of like second, third tier programs, even at the Power 5 level, I just want to see them be like really dominant rather than simply good and productive. Like I want to see Jaden Ott have like he doesn't need to be Breece Hall, but Breece Hall is an example of a guy who played at a program at a similar level, but was just so dominant that it was obvious that he'd be good. Almost like he was undeniably good at Iowa State. I don't see that from Jaden Ott. And so I wonder if he's a little bit more Jerome Ford, Chuba Hubbardy on the high end, which is absolutely not a bad thing. But yeah, so I feel like I want to see more.
So let's say he enters the ACC as a junior this year and outpaces Omarion Hampton or some of the other ACC running backs that are out there. He'll cement a pretty steep rise. Go ahead, waste your draft picks on that. And
well, if Jaden Ott is more productive this year than Omarion Hampton, and assuming Omarion Hampton is healthy and playing at a reasonably high level, I'll be very much in on Jaden Ott. That would be fantastic if he was, a 6 foot 215 guy who runs 4.48 and ran for 1,600 yards in the ACC. That would be beautiful.
I can see it. I can see it. It's coming. There's definitely a difference between carrying the ball in the Pac-12 versus the ACC, and I'm here for it. He's right there in that tier for you with he's right there with Raheem Sanders. I just like he's one of those guys that I root for on an outsized basis, just because he's
definitely a fun player. Like he's good in the open field. He's a long strider. Those guys are fun to watch. He looks like Eric Dickerson out there. He's a fun running back.
So do you have any guys on your radar in DEVEY that maybe people are sleeping on at this point?
People are sleeping on. I don't consume a ton of DEVEY content, so I'm not familiar with the landscape really or what consensus looks like. But let me find a guy who I think is good that doesn't seem super hyped. Caden Fegan at Illinois had a good freshman season. He's a big guy. I know Darius Taylor was a big name freshman, but I think Caden Fegan is kind of right there and was really good. Le'Veon Moss. This is one where I think I'm a little bit above consensus. Le'Veon Moss at Texas A&M, essentially, as far as I can tell, beat out a more highly touted player in Reuben Owens for that starting job and played well until I think he got hurt mid-season. But his box adjusted, team relative numbers looked really nice. So I think and he's got good size. I think Le'Veon Moss could be a good player. He's right behind Raheem Sanders in my rankings, based largely on the fact that Raheem Sanders stunk last year and seemed to be playing at a weight that was too heavy. So he needs to redeem himself. But Le'Veon Moss is right there for me with Phil Maffa. He's a little bit above Jaden Ott for me. He's Moss, I think, is a good player.
So speaking of Davis, and I sent you, I messaged you, talked to you on Twitter, however you want to put it, a couple months ago towards the end of the NCAA season. And one guy who's not in, he's not in the I always get the FCS FBS thing.
Oh, FBS is what everybody watches. FCS is the next
FCS.
Yeah.
So essentially a Dylan Lawby type. He's going to be in the FCS, not going to be a whole lot of tape on him, but his name is Lan Larison, and he's going to be the starting running back for UC Davis. So keep that name in mind.
All right.
He's not available in DEVEY leagues. He's not but as far as some guy who can come in and wow people at the Senior Bowl or put up some combine numbers that make people go, oh, we never heard of this guy. He's gonna write up draft boards. Eastern Washington, Eastern Washington, Portland State, that's the level that he's playing at. But he's destroying people.
Cooper Kupp went to Eastern Washington.
Yeah. There's a long legacy of Davis football players. I mean, Rich Martini, Raiders wide receiver in the 70s. Ken O'Brien, Jets quarterback. My boy Mike Wise, I don't have it up. He's somewhere here. Defensive end for the Raiders. JT O'Sullivan, the QB school. UC Davis legend. There's been a long legacy of when they were Division II non-scholarship, they were pumping out NFL.
Damn.
It is the best. It's comprehensive. It's DEVEY. It's rookies. It's Dynasty, and it's all sharp. So, and it's cat too. Anything else that you want to say to the people of the Undroppables, the Dynasty Pulse, or the Fantasy Burn?
I don't think so. I appreciate you having me on. It was nice to meet you, Brendan. Check me out. NoMoreParties.com. Get it while the getting's good.
Yeah. Again, thank you for coming on. Good luck in law school. I didn't really mean my joke when I emailed you and said I don't have to read your garbage takes anymore, but the world is getting another lawyer, so it's a lose-lose situation. Anyway, thank you very much. Everybody else, I hope you win, and you guys have a good day. I'm going to cut it here.